Welcome to this episode of Ask a Doc. On today's episode, we discuss weight loss. Now, weight and weight-related issues are huge themes in today's world, especially in the field of medicine, not only because of aesthetic implications, but more importantly, the health implications. Now, we all know that weight per se is related to a lot of health issues that plague us in our modern and sedentary world. Secondary, and we could also say parallel to the weight issue, is another related problem where secondary illnesses, maladies like diabetes, high cholesterol levels, hypertension also play a role. Now, all of these are intertwined, and an underlying common denominator is obesity. Now, more and more, and this is by no means to be confirmed with established medical literature, but more likely in layman's land, so to speak, in a lot of emerging data through the popular, that is to say, not necessarily scientific literature, weight reduction strategies include a lot of data which in fact in a clandestine way elucidate the actual causes of weight. One good example is, I noticed through the work of Dr. Sean O'Mara. If you haven't heard of him, please Google him. I don't know this doctor, and I'm by no means some sort of affiliate of his, but having looked at quite a lot of his YouTube videos, I really am convinced and quite persuaded by his theories, which I think in the fullness of time will be shown to be true. His issue and running theme in all of his videos is actually the importance, and the emerging importance that is, of visceral fat over the more established risk factors for cardiovascular diseases like, strokes and heart attacks. So the risk factor of cholesterol. So basically, what he's saying is visceral fat overrides cholesterol as a risk factor. Now, the standard cholesterol level that will be measured in your general practitioner's office, like LDL cholesterol or even VLDL cholesterol, so low density lipoprotein and very low density lipoprotein levels, are quite important in the field of cardiology, but these are still shrouded with a lot of controversy, given that there are some patients who present with heart attacks. Their whole families have members who keep getting heart disease and strokes, etc., but who don't necessarily have a high level of VLDL or LDL. So this is a bit of a medical conundrum. But Dr. O'Mara's theory that visceral fat, even in so-called skinny thin people, is quite an interesting theory, which I, for one, would be quite excited to see the data on that which is being built up as we speak. There are reports of large multi-center clinical trials looking into this very issue, so stay tuned. I'm sure there'll be a lot of exciting new data in the very near future. So just to get back on track as to why weight is important, we all know the complications of weight, diabetes and heart disease. Also things that are less well known but are equally important: skin problems. Think about venous ulcers in the very overweight individuals that sometimes we see on TV. The problems of the skeletal muscular system, arthritis in the knees and the back, an increased risk of infections as well. Not only of the skin, as in infected skin ulcers and stuff, but also more infectious diseases involving fungi and even bacteria. Think about, for example, in the intimate area, so vaginitis, balanitis, etc. So these are fungal infections of the vagina, of the male genitalia, for example. So there are very well-known complications, and this is what makes weight quite an important topic. And for sure, any strategies that we can employ or deploy in order to lose weight is obviously an advantage. So what causes weight gain, or what makes us obese? Now, there are, of course, many factors that contribute to weight gain, but there is something that is actually quite obvious. We know, for example, that compared to 50 years ago, in general, we are much more obese, much more overweight compared to our ancestors of 50, 60 years ago. It cannot therefore be an individual issue. I'm not trying to make excuses for those of us that are overweight, but it bears thinking to suppose that there must be a common environmental factor which hugely contributes to this issue. And I think there is. If you look at our food industry, there are lots of hidden controversies that, again, widely discussed more and more in quarters whose aim is to educate the general public. And I'll talk about this further on in this video. Knowledge and education is one of the key strategies that we can all deploy in order to tackle weight gain and obesity. We have more sugar in our diet compared to 50 years ago, and this is just a fact. We have had many artificial as well as natural sugars pumped into our food, and not having the adequate knowledge to avoid these, we fall into the trap. This is one easy way to get obese right from childhood, which is very sad because, of course, sugar in sweets and candy is a very easy hook to get children onto the fat train, so to speak, not to be provocative or controversial, but simply to call a spade a spade. Now, there are other factors involved, not only about sugar, and sugar is quite a huge topic, which we'll probably have to tackle in another video. The other issue, which may not be as well known as the sugar theory, is the oils, vegetable oils, seed oils. You've all heard of sunflower oil, canola oil. All of these oils are not natural at all. There is emerging evidence that these oils are actually completely artificial. They are manufactured and actually pumped full of unhealthy excipients, which are anything but conducive to a healthy life. A huge factor is the contribution of carbohydrates to the emerging obesity crisis. And finally, counterintuitively, the non-contribution of actual fats, meaning healthy fats, to the obesity problem. Namely, certain natural fats, for example, what you would get in butter, in avocado pears, olive oil, coconut oil, actually contribute to a healthy body composition and not obesity. Another major factor in this modern world compared to days of old is simply lack of exercise, lack of movement. Now, we all move less compared to our ancestors. For obvious reasons, our industrialized world means that we have trains, cars, planes, boats, bicycles, motors. In our civilized world, we have outsourced physical work, physical labor to machines. And so we are becoming more and more sedentary. Now, it doesn't have to be. We can certainly take time to exercise. And the type of exercise doesn't really matter. There's a lot of debate as to which better contributes to weight loss, whether it's more like sprinting or whether a marathon is better. It doesn't really matter. The important thing is to move the body. Whatever additional benefits we get from whatever type of exercise we choose can only be a plus. For example, there are people who use exercise as their time for meditation, for example, or their time to be outdoors, smell the fresh air, enjoy the nature, and simply to have some alone time, which is very important naturally for mental health. A wonderful side effect of exercise is the reduction of lymph stasis or edema, swelling of the legs, due to the fact that one is just simply seated all day at a sedentary type job, like an office job. Arguably, a major factor in the obesity crisis is simply lack of sleep, which may or may not be related to an increased general level of stress compared to days of old. Now, stress is interesting in its contribution to the obesity crisis, in that while you would expect a stress situation to actually lead to a reduced oral intake, so less eating and drinking, actually the opposite is true, because stress levels increase cortisol levels, and these are known to increase the process called gluconeogenesis, which is an intrinsic way of the body to actually produce sugar, which will then need to be metabolized by insulin. And an unfortunate side effect of high levels of insulin is weight gain. The other undesired effect of stress hormones circulating around the body is they tend to actually activate self-soothing maneuvers, which include eating, basically a way to comfort oneself. There are established medical conditions which are associated with weight gain. Many of these are endocrinological in nature, for example, thyroid disease, polycystic ovary disease, diabetes, of course. And this ties in very nicely with non-medical conditions as such, I would more be inclined to call them physiological states. So, for example, pregnancy and menopause would be included in this category. Another big group of causes of weight gain would include medicines. So in this group, I would class antidepressants, steroid tablets, and neuroleptics, medications used to treat psychiatric conditions. A lot of these have side effects of weight gain, either directly or through another side effect of hyperphagia, or eating more than is necessary to sustain life. So, having identified the most important causes of weight gain, how can we counteract these and beat the obesity crisis? I cover some of these techniques in my natural body sculpting video, which I shall link up to this video. Now, although weight loss, trying to lose weight, is a huge uphill struggle that many of us are confronted with throughout our lives, in fact, there is a silver lining here, and that is that whatever the cause of the weight loss, whether it be medications you're taking for depression or psychiatric problem, whether it's having had 6 babies in the course of 7 or 8 years, whether it's an underactive thyroid, or years of binging on potato crisps and Coca-Cola, the good news is, whatever the cause of this weight loss, it is still reversible. With the right techniques, one can lose weight naturally without resorting to drugs like Wegovy and Ozempic or to a surgeon's knife. The first strategy I'd like to touch on is simply intermittent fasting. Now, there's a lot of good data coming out that intermittent fasting simply works, whatever your diet. Do look at videos of Dr. Jason Fung, who is a Canadian kidney doctor who has done a lot of research into this. For me, the logic is clear. If you leave some time for your stomach to digest the food you've just eaten, leave a lot of time for these calories that have been subsequently stored away to be called up again, to be used, to be burned, to be consumed by your cells for anything above 10, 12, 14 hours per day before you recharge the system with more calories to be stored away. You allow your body a chance to burn up some of the calories that you intake. If, without allowing for these calories which have been stored up to be reused before the next intake, you end up simply recharging the system and adding to your calories, and therefore there can be no other result expected other than an increase to your weight. Now, this is where education comes in. One can actually prove to oneself how this works. For example, by getting a continuous glucose monitor to better understand how using time as a factor in one's food and drink consumption can actually be very enlightening and can actually contribute to a better possibility to tweak the system to your individual body needs. After all, we're all different. How my body reacts to a plate of rice, for example, might be completely different to how your body reacts to the same amount of food. And an understanding of crucial information, for example, the glycemic index of certain foods, can go a long way to help reduce needless intake of certain foods, which only contribute in an adverse manner to weight gain, even without you realizing it. What is well known is many carbohydrates fall into this category, but also many fruits. To compensate for a lot of high glycemic index foods, high glycemic index foods, one can simply mix with non or low sugar foods, such as sugar-free yogurt, for example, to dilute the effects of the high glycemic food. Another trick would be, for example, to eat more fermented foods. These are not only good for us in general because of their non-sweet taste. Many of them are quite sour, for example, sauerkraut and kefir and the Korean food kimchi, but also particularly because fermented foods are good for our gut, or specifically gut microbiomes. As alluded to above, simply avoid all vegetable oils. They are simply not healthy. Take more olive oil, avocado oil, coconut oil even, and certainly reduce carbohydrate intake relative to other food groups. Proteins, salads, pulses, fibers are all good for us because they are packed full of nutrients useful for the body and not simply empty calories which fill up our stomachs without contributing anything positive at the cellular level of our bodies. Whether one wants to go vegetarian, go paleo, in my book, doesn't really matter. Each to his own. What's important is a constructive strategy that will contribute to an overall healthier lifestyle and hopefully, as a positive, a reduction in weight. Again, as alluded above, when it comes to exercise, whether it's a sprint or a marathon that you're into, very little importance I would place on that. And perhaps what's optimal would be a mixture of both, actually. Sprint to build up muscle and marathon to increase the burning of calories. I would say both are equally important. Having enough sleep, and in this sense, enough varies from individual to individual, of course. One knows what's best for one's own body, but on average, something between 6 to 10 hours a night would be probably the most optimal range. However we can to manage stress levels, again, it's an individual thing. That makes a massive contribution to weight loss. As for most endeavors that we engage ourselves in, it doesn't hurt, of course, to use the psyche to help us on our way. In this sense, the mantra, think yourself trim, for sure would be a strategy that definitely wouldn't hurt. Basically, if you can think it and believe it, you can definitely do it. And there we have it, a roundup of causes and also hopefully good solutions to the problem of weight gain. Till the next video, stay healthy.